It's my pleasure to introduce you now to a selected group of contributors to the book, and I do want to emphasize that it is a selected group. We would have loved to have all the contributors here. The studio is clearly not big enough for that, but we do have some of the other contributors actually in the audience. Kribben's here, Saris is here, Nena, and others. So I'd ask you to feel free to contribute as and when that becomes a possibility. But for now, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Langa Khumalo, Professor Mershen Pillay, Dr. Craig Blewett, and of course you've all met Professor Gayatri Spivak. And I'm going to ask Langa to first just tell us who he is, and then they'll all tell us a little bit about their contributions to the book as well. But first, just who you are, Langa.
Thank you very much. I am Langa Khumalo, and the Director of Language Planning and Development at the Teaching and Learning Portfolio here at UKZN. My responsibility is to try and operationalize a very difficult language policy that was enunciated in 2006 and revised in 2014, the Universal Language Policy and Plan.
Yep, and we've heard lots about language with Gayatri early on, so I'm hoping that you're going to have a fruitful discussion there. Mershen.
Okay, my name is Mershen Pillay, and I'm from the discipline of speech-language pathology, so emphasis on the pathology, and that's based in the College of Health Sciences. I've been back working at the university since 2014, although I've got a long history of working here from 1992.
Great. Welcome, Mershen.
All right, who am I? It's a deep question. Philosophical, I don't know.
How much time do we have?
The simple, on the surface answer to it is I work actually, my primary job as a lecturer here at UKZN is in the School of IT. But my real passion, obviously having been at this university for, 40, 50 years. It can't be that long, but it feels that long. It's close. 100 years. It is in education, and so my background really is at the convergence of these two, and trying to look at new ways of bringing education or doing education, but using technology to support it.
Yeah, and you also bring body and mind together because you're a marathon runner.
Yes, I do like to do the odd run and comrades and all those fun little events in between.
Great. Well, welcome, Craig. I'm going to ask you, perhaps not in the same order, maybe we could begin with Mershen, to tell us a little bit about your contribution to the book. What did your chapter look like? What was it about? How did it engage with this, with the broader theme of the book, which is disrupting higher education?
Okay, so my chapter is called Depathologizing the Higher Education Curriculum. And I write this from a perspective of being in health sciences, and I think my positionality as a speech therapist and audiologist is an important one to make reference to because of my history of being trained in looking at deficit and looking at what's wrong with people. So in other words, a lot of my own education focused on the subject of pathology, and universities like hospitals, which is the other institution I worked in mainly, do for me exactly the same thing. There's a tendency to focus on pathology per se. And so really this chapter is looking at how we go from this dark space of working with everything that's wrong and being in a deficit mode through to that happier, healthier other side, that almost romanticized space of being positive, and if that's at all possible. So it's about that transition, and so the framework I've developed is something which is what the chapter is focused on, is called the relationship of laboring affinities. It's how we keep on doing the things that we love and unlove them at the same time, and how we move with the conflict we have in our everyday existence. How we work with things like uncertainty, and how we try to be good in what we do, so how we develop a sense of morality or moralism. And part of looking at all these concepts centers around the way in which we communicate and how we interact with people on an everyday basis. one of the difficulties I had with this chapter was where it was placed. It was placed in philosophical museums, and Michael made reference to the first bit there, almost as though there's a distinction between our thoughts and our actions, like as though the two can't be connected in a sense. And I want to emphasize this chapter actually is being written with reflections on my life of being a practitioner. And I've actually worked more in the practice space than I have in an academic or thought environment. And so that's what the chapter is about. It's about how we move over to that other side.
And so perhaps the question of norming being both polemical and political might be something we could open up for discussion. But thank you, Mershen. Langa?
My chapter is titled Disrupting English Hegemony, Intellectualizing African Languages. And coming from a linguistic background and looking at language as an organizing tool in knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, and even innovation itself. So it looks at language post-Second World War as a contested area in ushering in a language which has a very colorful history, particularly in the continent, and arguments that are being preferred in the discourse that this language can then be embraced as a sanitized language that fits all and functions for all of us very well. And looking at our higher education spaces and the attrition rates and the difficulty in knowledge access, do we dare challenge the hegemony of English in our institutions? And if we do, how do we go about introducing other languages in order to improve epistemic access, in order to improve these very challenging figures in terms of attrition? So language is an organizing tool, as an organizing instrument in knowledge access, knowledge production, knowledge dissemination. And in the context of what UKZN has introduced by way of its policy to try and intellectualize an African language so that it becomes a language in those that can be used in those spaces, a language for teaching and learning, for instance. Can we do that? Is it possible to intellectualize a language such as isiZulu in order to introduce it in the knowledge economy as part of one of the many tools that can be used in teaching and learning and research and so on? So it's an experimentative discourse in trying to show the practicalities in the intellectualization of a language. And we draw from the experiences of the Prague School, where this whole intellectualization effort was initiated, and see whether we can draw from those experiences and do something about isiZulu so that it can begin to negotiate complex knowledge forms. Knowledge itself is very complicated as a form, but access to knowledge, should it be as complicated? Or we can actually improve the process of accessing that knowledge. And I know that African languages are looked at through those lenses again that actually made the English dominate and other colonial languages as shallow and inadequate for the purpose. But do we dare challenge those cliches? Do we dare introduce a language that is a kitchen language, a language that is used in spaces that are non-challenging and non-complex? And the experiment at UKZN ensures that you can actually intellectualize an African language. And we have done that in stages by creating a corpus of this language, and on the basis of that corpus, try and create technologies that are necessary for that language to be used in these newer spaces, and also create a whole set of terminology, because the counter argument is you are not going to get sufficient terminology to teach physics. You're not going to get sufficient terminology to teach anatomy in these newer languages, or so-called shallow languages. And we have initiated processes again to create the terminology, the necessary terminology, and have introduced technologies to store these terminologies so that they're easily accessible by our students and our lecturers, so that we can see whether there is a process to initiate and introduce these terms and introduce a discourse, because again, in organizing that knowledge, you will need this language that is organic, that grows on its own and is usable by people that are in those spaces. So it's an interesting challenge, which is not only in the chapter, but institutionally that the university has decided to embrace and see whether it is possible to intellectualize an African language.
Thank you. And you relate that, I'm just looking here, you relate that specifically to the idea of cognitive damage, because you say not to consider this counter is actually to be complicit in our cognitive damage. And I suppose that might be the question also that other people have, is phrasing it like that. Intellectualization of an African language is itself loaded. And so we might want to ask, what does that mean? Does it mean that the language isn't intellectual to begin with? The currency of that phrase and the way in which it is used. But that's just about semantics, perhaps. But we'll talk about that a little bit. Craig, can we hear a little bit from you about your...
I feel cognitively damaged because I can't remember the title of my chapter. That's probably because it got changed a few times, but I do know what the chapter is about. Essentially... are you looking at the title?
I'll get it for you.
Oh, okay. Essentially, it's looking at specifically actually how we use technology in teaching, and that big complex word which was quoted a few times, which I refer to as the skeuomorphic curse, actually, how that's actually done some serious damage. What's happened with technology, it's been around now for quite a while, and you made reference to that, people hinting that they were going to have problems many years ago. But what's happened is education has been slow to the party. So my background is in IT, and for a long time I was helping businesses implement technology solutions in their companies. And the way it would work back in the days, you'd arrive in the business and they would tell you what they wanted, and you would spend a lot of time with them, and eventually you'd come with a solution. Fast forward 30 years, universities, schools, everyone else have woken up thinking, well, we need technology. So what do? We turn to technology people. Who are the experts? Well, they're IT companies, and they come and drop technology solutions into our schools, into our universities, and essentially we silicon coat what we've always done. Nothing's changed. And so this is where the skeuomorphic thing comes in. It's the form of the old without its function. We don't even need, so for example, you can have an e-book that has a curling page, but it's just to make it look like an old traditional book. It has no real function. And so we're sitting in this space where technology is now being blamed that it's actually damaging our education system. We're putting technology in these research. It'll show you if you take tech out of the classroom, the marks will improve. My question is it the technology, or is it how we're using the technology, or rather not using the technology? And so the chapter is exploring that and raising these real problems that, maybe to put it simply, are around the silicon coating, and then coming up with a taxonomy of pedagogies that sort of hang together, that are built on the 21st century, that are pedagogies that work in a way that our modern students learn and how they like to use technology, and trying to say, well, if we brought that into a classroom, would that make it more impactful than simply dropping technology, dropping boxes into classrooms?
Thank you, Craig. The title of your chapter
yes,
was From Traditional Pedagogy to Digital Pedagogy, Paradoxes, Affordances, and Approaches.
Oh, no wonder I couldn't remember it.
I wouldn't remember that either. so thank you. So now we have this really rich introduction to a snapshot of some of the chapters in the book. And I wonder, Gayatri, before I open up to the audience, if you have some comments, because I know that you have
a synopsis
read
of
some
my
them.
talk,
Yeah,
right?
please.
Yes. Because I obviously have comments addressed to all my friends here, but that won't be appropriate. Okay, now the title was given by Ravi Kanpat, okay? Humanity, I'm reading it. humanities, see, I'm smart.
Yeah,
I got
you're
the
very
book from
clever.
her.
I kept thinking I should take your book.
Yeah. Humanities, democracy, and the politics of knowledge in higher education. So if you tell me that that's what it's about, then it's about that. See, my whole thing is that I have never, I did there, yeah, okay? I had never had a course, undergraduate or graduate, in philosophy. So I have never had a course, undergraduate or graduate, in education. So therefore, my power is, my strength, I should say, my strength is that I have no power. Therefore, I can't even in this field, I can't really want to, get a few kudos, etc. So that's why I think I can be useful. I'm the emperor's new clothes child, okay? So that's how this talk was given. This talk was given exactly in terms of what the situation was. And you now can figure out that that's what I was talking about in the morning, right? So it has one section which was at the podium speaking then and there. It just came to me as I was facing the audience. And there, my real point was that you really have to learn how to teach. Not just learn how to teach, but you know what you're talking about. In that situation, sorry, I shouldn't be addressing you. I'm just giving a synopsis. You have to learn. The question that Levi asked, how to teach this particular group that's very different from you in its upbringing, both in New York City at the top of the tree, English, French, and German at Columbia University, PhD level, and at the very bottom, landless illiterates, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes at the border of Jharkhand and West Bengal. So this is a very broad spectrum, and in both cases, I have to learn constantly how to teach. So that was basically the synopsis of the first part, which was at the podium, speaking then and there. I let the situation speak to me, to learn how to speak to this group. Then came the prepared speech as the occasion was imagined before. And there I took on the Quality Enhancement Project, QEP, and I made a criticism of how those kinds of projects visited upon a system of higher education can really be very counterproductive, especially since the model taken was a model from a business school, Kota. And then remember, this is also, I can't say anything new, what I was saying this morning, that in terms of the person who was the recipient of this educational change, this model of Harvard Business School was just simply not going to work. It was an absurd project. So that's what the middle part is. And I'm very interested in the question about the labor market, by the way. We can talk about that, but that's not part of the synopsis. So at that point, I also gave a little bit of a summary of the education that I do in these schools, which are, as I said, among the landless illiterate for 30 years now, and how it is that I'm trying to learn, and I'm not really learning yet, because 5,000 years of really keeping them down, that historical crime can't be undone in my lifetime. At any rate, I'm from the group that oppressed them. So unless I believe as I say to them, I'm good, my parents were good, but history, thousands of years of oppression don't just disappear because we are nice and good. So I'm your enemy, and you must remember this in order to be able to think for yourself. On the other hand, thinking for themselves, intellectual labor, is almost impossible to teach. That's part of the middle part. Okay, and there's a lot that has changed in the middle part, okay? So then I answered pre-sent questions. What is it to teach the humanities? What is the inbuilt aporia of democracy? Then how do we confront the inevitable corporatization of the entire education system? What is the role of the curriculum? the relationship between class, race and liberal education in our countries, etc., will to social justice and enforcement, what is it to interpret a history of violence and use it without accusation or excuse within the broadest interpretation of the academy. And that's also something that I spoke a little about this morning. Why is national liberation not a revolution? That is a very important thematics for me, and that answer is the longest. And then how do we combat the Anthropocene, that the post-human, if you call it that. I don't think post-human is so easy, so I call it the Anthropocene. But I like best the answer to one question, which, by the way, the answer would be different now, but with that I'll conclude. The question was, what is the role of epistemological change clustered within education in notions of identity and the broader public? And my answer was, I don't know. So on that answer, which is basically the motto of my entire life, I close.
Thank you, Gayatri. It's interesting how I needed to be disrupted for a moment to actually remember that you were also a contributor to the book, because the idea was for you to be in conversation with the contributors and positioning you as the expert. So I was glad that you disrupted that thought. So yeah, really rich array of contributions, quite diverse actually, you know, in its breadth. Each of you dealing with completely different things and yet towards a common topic. And so perhaps we can open up then for questions and comments.
I have a question to the panel. So I was touched by the way, I'm Sarojini, I'm from higher education. So busy teaching lecturers ideas around pedagogies in higher education, assessing learning in higher education and so on. So I was very touched when Gayatri spoke about learning to learn how to teach. And so what I'm raising is who does the curriculum change and who's responsible for this? Surely we need to learn how to do curriculum change. And where does this learning take place? And who's responsible for the teaching and for the learning how to teach and how to do curriculum change?
Anyone from the panel?
I suppose I could maybe just give some insight into my own experience of wanting to learn how to learn.
How to teach.
Yeah, and how to teach, yeah. But actually how to learn. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
As it's one of the easiest jobs to get into, being a university educator. You don't need a formal qualification that enables you to teach and to reproduce a professional. And I think that was for me the biggest danger in the position that I occupied when I first came to university. I really didn't know what I was doing. And which is why I walked over to Michael Samuel's office, knocked on the door and said, can you help me to learn how to teach? Can you teach me how to learn, actually? It was more that, really, the beginning. And it opened a door for me that I think I'm forever grateful for, because I became a different professional. So I was trained to be an audiologist and a speech therapist, and then became something else. And I think that for me was the biggest shift in becoming an academic and an educator. And for many of us, that's something we don't necessarily do at a university. We don't learn how to teach.
But that becoming is also an unbecoming, isn't it? And that
True.
learning is an unlearning.
It's a critical consumption of that. I
yeah,
think it's about how we use that information to enact our daily teaching.
Yeah. And the assumption is that when you have a PhD, you know what to do in the classroom.
I must just add that my PhD is a doctorate in education, because I literally went over the other side.
Okay.
I just want to pick up before we get anyone of those waving people in the audience. I had a similar sort of journey, also coming from RT. Doing a PhD in education was like, and I remember sitting there when the cohort started, and I thought, do I want to do a PhD in education? You know, I've been in RT, and it was actually only during that I realized I've actually been in education. I haven't been in RT. And that was a big thing for me to realize, wow, this is what I really love. I don't mind actually what I'm teaching. You know, but coming back to your point is, you know, and so maybe it's, you know, you can sort of be a bit proud with what I know about education now, and why don't others? I think so many people, when you're in my position, as you say, come to a university and you know your topic, you're a content expert. And teaching and pedagogy and all of those are not even mentioned. You know, and so the first step in this whole process is actually realizing that you need to realize that you're missing something. And once you've realized that you're missing something fundamental, which is this whole education and knowing how to teach and what learning's about, then comes the next stage of, okay, so how do I do it? And it's particularly hard in university environment because, as you said, these are experts. You're a PhD, doctorate, whatever in some field, and someone's going to come to you and say, no, but you don't know how to actually teach. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
You know, and I think so it is a big thing. Whose responsibility is it to raise that? How do we even raise it? And that's in a university level. Then you drop down to a school level, and it's another thing. Teachers have left, they've done teacher training, they're in school. I know how to teach.
Yeah.
Along comes my discipline, technology. Of course, I know how to use it. I'll just use it like I've always done it. You know, so we've got multiple layers of challenges here, making people aware they don't know how to necessarily teach or don't know how to teach in a new era. And those are big challenges that we face.
But it comes down, I think, to the question earlier about why don't you just do the curriculum change, right? And that what I'm hearing here is that you can't just, because you have to be reflexive of your own praxis before you can actually decide, well, what needs to be changed and how do we engage with that? Langa, did you want to say something? Because I can see Michael waving.
Yeah, I could actually reiterate what they've said, but maybe from a language perspective, something that I experienced was to go with this physics lecturer to his classroom and to try and see whether this experiment, this whole UKZN experiment adds value to the teaching and learning process. And to ask the students to speak in a language, in a tutorial set up in a language in which they are comfortable in. And to discover that most of the isiZulu speaking students spoke in isiZulu, discussed within themselves in isiZulu. And when I asked the lecturer, did you find it useful for the students to engage each other in a language in which was different from the mode, the norm, i.e. the English, because the tutorial was supposed to be English, traditionally English. And he said, a confession, the quality of the discussion was better and the quantity. Most of the students that never actually contributed in a tutorial setup in this free environment actually spoke for the first time in that particular tutorial. And so the quality and quantity was enhanced when the students were given the choice of a language, the choice of the teaching process. And so while the lab people continue to say, let's find appropriate terminology for this specialized knowledge system to continue. The students themselves find the discourse very easily, and they can, because the idea is to learn a concept. The idea is to share, acquire knowledge, and even be able to have the capacity to disseminate that knowledge, to share that knowledge. It's in the language, because that is the organizing device, that is the organizing tool. And a learning process is actually complete when a student has actually internalized the knowledge, and they can even articulate it in a language that they're comfortable in. And so that experience is another kind of experience from a linguistic point of view.
Thank you, Langa. I see Michael, I'm going to ask you to keep it very brief because we have to be done by 5:30. So, Michael.
I'm wondering whether the imposition of education as a discipline onto other disciplines is also another kind of arrogance. Because I think there's also a kind of view that somehow or the other the educationists have got it right and we just have to import it into our own discipline. So a part of the debate of the tension between disciplines, emerging fields, crossing borders, all of that is asking whose languages are we using? How are we choosing the languages to talk about our own operations, our own thinking? So I think there's some danger also in an educational imperialism as well.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so I'm going to ask you for some closing words before we actually do a formal launch. Are we going to do a formal launch, Robbie? Yeah, okay. So, Langa, just some closing words maybe? Just besides go and buy the book. You get one under your seat. Sure.
I want to suggest that there's also what might be called, as Michael is speaking, I think of a kind of academic parasitism, which education might be found guilty of. So my point is, we tend to ride on the theories of the Zizeks and the Gambans and so on. So why aren't we producing our own Gambans? And I'm not saying that we must then develop compartments. We're all in this together. So I'm happily able to use Shakespeare and Butler, but we created these borders. We talk about removing borders, but we created the borders. And then we show how we are cosmopolitan, intellectual, by then crossing the borders, but we still retreat into our language. And we appropriate. I'm trying to think about what I'm saying, but it just follows on what Michael is saying.
It's sort of like an add and stir approach rather than a growing of our own timber, thinking through carefully how we fit into that, right? Okay, I think we can think about that a little bit more in the time of.
Why is it that Professor Spivak's work has come in the 21st century to the School of Education? After 75 years of her living and breathing and doing and thinking, decoloniality, post-coloniality and all.
Well, I must say that it hasn't. I agree with you. This is not when it has come to education.
Yes.
So therefore, that your question is very important. You know, for better or for worse,
Yes.
I have
I'm
not.
glad it has.
I have not been without entry. Influence is for others to say, but I have not been without entry in the field of general education, including the hard sciences. I can talk about Roald Hoffmann, for example, and yet not into a school of education. Why? We have a teachers' college.
Traveling theory.
You know.
So Freire travels all over.
Yeah, Freire does. Yeah. Okay, something for us to ponder. I'm just conscious of time. Closing words, if you have them.
Yeah, maybe from my point of view, just to settle, because oftentimes when I'm talking about the language policy at UKZN, I'm asked, are you going to ultimately replace English with isiZulu? That is impossible, that is counterintuitive, that is totally unnecessary. English is and will continue to be a language of the academy, a language of teaching and learning and research at UKZN. But maybe to open spaces for other languages that can be capacitated so that they can be part and parcel of the process of teaching and learning.
Yeah. And the irony of us having this conversation in English is not lost on us, of course.
Maybe if I can just pick up on what Michael referred to in terms of educational imperialism, and to speak about the utility, the usefulness of that. I think it's incredibly useful to learn the technology of education and learn how to use it. And so I would like to have that as a welcome part in our considerations around developing curricula and really looking at the way we teach. And I'd like to enforce, though, that what we don't do is have a successive regime, and we look at replacing curricula with another form of power. So in other words, a dominating curricula, one that houses dominance as part of its essential core, is something I wouldn't want to promote. So, and that's what I've written about in the chapter, just as a hint.
Just as a hint. Thank you, Mershen. Craig.
I want to pick up on something that Professor Spivak mentioned, and it's a thing that stuck with me, and I remember it during my PhD, meeting some, and I'm going to put in inverted commas, random person, because I don't know who she was, on the side of the road, standing somewhere. She wasn't my race, she wasn't my age, she wasn't my gender. So she was just there, whatever, I can't remember the details. And somehow I just mentioned I'm doing a PhD, and I didn't know if I said what it was in. And she said to me, just make sure, one thing, that it makes a difference to people's lives. And I thought, wow, here you in, and I'm reading, you know, from Foucault to Freire to whoever, and thinking, wow, how will this make a difference? And you mentioned, you know, activism and what this book is about, and undoing cognitive damage and disrupting, that's all great. But at the end of the day, this must land on the road. This must impact people in classrooms. And so you read the book, there is theory in it, and it's deep, and it is embedded, I think, in good, solid research. But I think also part of it is about, yes, but this is not just for a panel discussion. This is not just for academic, jousting and whatever. This is real stuff that can make real differences. And to me, what I'm hoping and keen to see is to see these things ultimately put into some practice, that they are made to work in schools, in universities, and we see the change. And it'll be nice if we start to see more and more of that it's not just theory, it is actually reality. To me, that's the activism on the ground that was referred to earlier.
Great, thank you, Craig. And now, I'm not sure exactly how you mark a book launch. What do you actually have to do? But Gayatri, you have the honor of launching the book.
Surely that's how you launch, no?
That gives a whole new meaning to throw the book at them.
Anyway, listen, it is for my sake that we have to stop at 5:30. So before I launched this precious book, by the way, let me tell you, in Calcutta, I was asked to launch 2 books. One about Girindra Bose, who had done psychoanalysis before Freud, etc., written to Freud, etc. Another was his own uncollected stuff, etc. And I had no idea how to launch a book, right? So I was like, I never launched a book before. So on the other hand, they're huge, like 1,500 people more, because they were also sitting outside, audience in Calcutta, where they're all very judgmental of me because she lives in the United States, eh? She's lost all her culture. So I can't, and I'm speaking in Bengali, I can't, on such a difficult topic, I can't show that I don't know how to launch a book, okay? So God knows what I did. I just did that. Okay, and then after all was done, I mean, no one could quite say anything to me, but I knew that I wasn't doing the right thing, and it's true. That's why I gave the book back. I was supposed to keep it, etc. I told the guy, I said to the guy, what is his name, Anil Acharya, I said, Anil, I've never really launched a book in my life, so my only training has been on this Calcutta occasion. But since it's for me that we are closing at 5:30, I do want to have a short, closing word. See, the thing is, because, of the politically different situation in India, I went to school in Bengali, right? And so therefore, we did algebra, etc., all in Bengali, except the big words were like formula equation. Those were formula equation, okay? Now, when I'm dealing with, and I kind of don't mind that, because many people who globally now are learning this computer stuff, digitizing, etc., they don't know anything about anything else. But they know those main words, and everything else is in their language. English has gone to hell. So to an extent, I like that. And now, because I trained the high school students in those villages, there, of course, everything is in Bengali, right? Even algebra is called Bij Gonit. Eh? And so the thing is, I didn't know that algebra was Bij Gonit, but kind of made it, I'm not dumb. I saw, this is algebra they're doing. And so I've even told them, look, every word that begins with al came to us from the Arabs, because they have to know that this isn't just English. So I said, remember that, we discovered the 10, but everything else comes from the Arabs. Okay, so these kids, the children, they don't know anything. Their parents are completely illiterate, okay, and so they don't have any prejudice against English or anything. But, my 2 supervisors, who have also forgotten all their algebra, and I, of course, learned it in high school, right? So we go like this when the kids are sitting, because in the high school, nobody is teaching them anything. Nobody, Bengali, English, Pashto, Arabic, German, I don't care. Nobody is teaching them anything, okay? So we are doing the teaching, right? I'm teaching algebra, hear this. And so, we're sitting, the 2 supervisors have also forgotten everything, right? So we are sitting, and the high school kids are sitting, and the older people are saying, hey, formula ki re? It's all in Bengali. Formula ki? Dekh, pata ulte khuje dekh to formula ta ki banglaye. That is to say, keep turning the pages and see what the hell formula is in Bengali. Because if you keep turning the pages, you will come to a first place, a plus b whole square equals this and that, where the formula or equation is going to be given in Bengali, And you know, that word means formula or equation. It's a lot of fun. But on the other hand, it's a lot of fun for me because I'm learning these damn words, you know, and teaching algebra. But the thing is that sometimes making mistakes as well. But at any rate, I think keeping the main words in English is not a problem, because if the explaining language is, because otherwise, do you realize that you would have to ask others to learn isiZulu? Otherwise, it just puts them in a hole. So no, it's not a bad idea. One of my students has just written this book called Learning Zulu, Mark Sanders. But on the other hand, you know, whether he's good or bad, I don't know. He's sent me the book. I haven't yet opened it. But so that's something I wanted to say for the bottom for your project. And for the top, I want to say something also. I know I'm taking slightly longer, but my synopsis took 9 minutes. I saw you'd given 10 minutes. But you know, at the top, I just taught a course on global and universal, okay, senior seminar, Columbia University 4th year students, okay, self-selected group, I only take 12 of them sitting, about as elite a situation as you can imagine, okay, and what I was telling them was, we're not going to start from definitions, we're going to look at people, all different kinds of texts, and in everything, something like global and something like universal and something like general and something like individual and something like singular comes in. And we're going to plot them, we're going to read. And then at the end of the semester, we are going to offer something like non-definitions, because you need something like this, because you're getting definitions all over the place. This is a city, the most powerful university in the city which has the UN. So therefore, I tried to do this. What did I learn? That they have not been taught to read. They can summarize. Remember, Columbia University, 4th year, I interviewed the students before I brought them in, okay? They are going to become the kings of the world once they graduate. It's a big brand name. So they can summarize, they can describe, they can put their own silly ideas first, saying, this is what I'm interested in. Talk about misdirected. This is what I'm interested in, and therefore this text proves, and then quotes proving their damn ideas, they haven't been able to go out, etc. And I kept pushing and I kept pushing, smiling and saying, look, no, you know what you have to do, because every week they had to write, every class they had to write a response paper, 1 page, just reading. So I say I can teach the telephone directory. It's how to, what you were saying. It doesn't depend on this book succeeding. Depends on if you teach people how to teach books. So it's not a question of anything. So therefore, in that kind of a situation, finally, the best student in philosophy, okay, analytic philosophy, Mark Guthrie is his name. I will take it off if it's published, but please don't put the name there. Okay, very nice white guy. Very sweet white guy. He could give me back my words constantly, okay? And I would say, talking the talk, Mark, not walking the walk, because not one response shows that you can read. They've taken it away from you, your philosophical training. And so this wonderful, sweet guy, the last day, he's sitting, he comes to my office and he's weeping. He's weeping. And I said to him, I'm not your mother, I'm not your shrink, so I'm not going to console you. But the fact that you have developed not just some rage, but some sense of loss against what they haven't taught you. In other words, how language happens on the page. This has taken it away from you. So therefore, the idea of how you learn how to teach, they really taught me how to teach the top, not to save intellectual labor through digital idealization. See, and that's the wrong use. Whereas with the project that I said I must say something about it, the mother tongues, okay? What we are doing is we are making a database with a multi-portal database for development workers. Do you realize that all around the world now people are almost weeping because we are doing this, but we won't get funding? Only South Africa gets funding on the African continent for these kinds of things. And this is an Africa-led project. So therefore, there's never any requirement for language learning for development workers. And so therefore, these develop, but some are good-hearted. They learn a little Kiswahili, they learn a isiZulu, they think that they're going to approach the people right at the bottom, okay? And so, I mean, they will say, well, no, so therefore, this thing, what they're doing, you see, I knew that the people right at the top of linguistics, must be interested in this, because this 19th and 20th century, every language, in order to be a language, has to be put in a box, separated from everything, given an orthography, given a writing. This what we are looking at in the unwritten languages is pre-scientific digitizing. They're writing on memory. They're working with the computer in the head. It's an analogy, I know. But so I knew that if I looked and looked and looked, I would find them. And they exist. So now the little small pilot group from the small university, rural nothing like this, Kwara State. And so each year I bring this person, which I talked about here, and kind of support them out of my research fund, because they're not Columbia level, so they can't get in. And so, but the president has given me permission. So this little pilot project group, they are so wonderful. They go in, and this time I told them, because I have now the support of these extraordinary linguists, and they've told me some things about what they're learning from the unwritten languages and how they teach how to learn, etc. Because otherwise, like I say, parliamentarians use it for campaigns, etc. It's not like the UN is completely out of the picture. They're preserving. Who the hell wants them to be preserved? They're survival languages. There are people, so therefore, we have to go towards them in another way. And so this time, I'm just coming from there. They are out of control, because first of all, they're very happy that we are doing this kind of underhanded stuff, right? And they've got a visionary vice chancellor, complete PhD from Canada, Abdul Rashid Nahalla from Ilorin, but nonetheless, he gives them a little money to go do this. And I said, this time, I said, look, forget your headphones and forget your recorders, learn the languages. This is going to be so fun, you're going to laugh your head off. On the other hand, they will have more power than you. And if we get funding, this is how I now know, because of these top linguists, what to say, how to learn, and so on and so forth. This is going to be development. R&D is screwing the world. That's my focus. That's the biggest criminality in the whole world, sustainable underdevelopment. So therefore, from that point of view, I just wanted to talk about this, because we'll need more and more. We've gone already into Ghana and a little bit into Kenya. But we'll see what happens. You see, and because of the racism of the funders, I need not to be a brown person, see? But I can't go in blackface. So, it's ridiculous. So on the other hand, everybody there, Abiola Irele, who just died, he was my brother in this matter. It was he who said first, hey, by God, you've got an idea, Gayatri, move with it. You know what I mean? So, therefore, I just wanted to get this said, because this language thing, and it is true, what do they do? There's another guy, Henri Touna, unfortunately, he's not even brown, he's white, but he's worked in the Cameroon for 25 years. Once he and I connected, he almost wept, because nobody thinks this way. Because he's been writing his little books, unfortunately, in French. You think English is bad. So these books say, why are we translating French texts into these languages? This is ridiculous. So there is a critical mass, but we must do it right. You see, that's why I gave you the example of me teaching algebra. Formula equation so,
It sounds to me
anyway.
that there's a book here, Langa, that you and Gayatri need to speak. So we'll be launching that book next.
So now it is my honor and my pleasure, against my best instincts to be literal, to metaphorize the launching and present to you, ladies, gentlemen, friends, enemies, a book edited by Michael Anthony Samuel, Rabi Dhanpat, and Naina Amin, Disrupting Higher Education Curriculum, Undoing Cognitive Damage. Read it and learn.
What a launch. Thank you so much. So we thank you for to our panelists and our contributors and our editors, and for the space, Rabi, to do this kind of work. I think it's great. Thank you everyone for your time and for coming. We are going to have some music. Rudy's going to sing, Betty's going to recite some poetry, Chats is going to do some more music for us. So the party continues, doesn't end now. And we have some bubbly to toast next door. So you're all welcome to that celebration. But but thank you.